Looks like we're live. Welcome, welcome everyone. Today we're going to go over Arthur Schopenhauer and exactly what his philosophy is, why it's interesting, why I like it. Um, and yeah, hopefully we'll just get a new appreciation for the idea of pessimism because you know, there's there's almost like an enlightenment that comes out of pessimism. There's almost a point where pessimism can turn into optimism. And this is best seen in Camus' words, where Camus talks about, how absurd life is, how it really has no purpose, but there's little moments that make it worth living. There's little things that we experience every day that keep us going, that keep us pushing. And this is really a similar idea that Schopenhauer puts forward. But Schopenhauer, basically, his idea is to destroy how we view um, the world around us so that we can view it in a whole different manner. What's up, X before YZ? How's everything, man?
Was a German philosopher born in 1788 who is known as the philosopher of pessimism. He is among the first thinkers to bring Eastern philosophical ideas into Western philosophy. Schopenhauer's father was a wealthy merchant, and his mother was a popular author, and is among the first German.
When you first pick up Schopenhauer, you'll probably be like, what is this guy saying? But if you start looking at it from a Eastern philosophy context, it makes total sense and you really appreciate the things that he's saying.
Women to publish books without a pseudonym. As a youth, Schopenhauer was destined to follow his father's footsteps as a merchant. His father, however, had been through a period of depression before he was found drowned in a canal in 1805. It is suspected that it may have been suicide. Schopenhauer acknowledged to have inherited his father's melancholy. He was fond of his father, but had a horrible relationship with his mother, admitting that the happiest years of his childhood were those spent away from her. Schopenhauer developed a distrust.
That's such a crazy thing to say about your mother. Wait, I need to get slower. Yeah, dude, we got this in line.
Of people in general, a depressed view of the world, an inability to maintain close relationships with anyone, and a sense of personal insecurity, whether in the form of anxiety attacks, phobias, or hypochondria. The death of his father, however, liberated him from the worldly life of business, and Schopenhauer hurled himself almost ferociously into study, taking private lessons and attending lectures on medicine, philosophy, mathematics.
He Interestingly enough, his mother had like some relationship, um, not like a romantic relationship, but like acquaintance with Goethe. Goethe, I don't know how you say it. And basically, this was Schopenhauer's first step into the intellectual world. I'm sure he's going to say it at some point.
History, physics, and astronomy, among others. He treated each subject with the utmost concentration, and taken as far as one could reasonably be expected to be by a student of his age. His progress was so remarkable that his tutors began to predict a distinguished future for him as a classical scholar. As a polyglot, he knew German.
Schopenhauer is like the furthest thing from a classical scholar. Um, if anything, it's the biggest against him that he really didn't get the recognition that other philosophers at the time were getting. And he still isn't really respected. He's in like niche circles, people love Schopenhauer, but like in mass, like he's not put in the likes of Kant, not put in the likes of who was the guy that was I can't remember. There's another really famous guy that was around at the same time as him and Schopenhauer. His philosophy makes a whole lot more sense, but he just never got the recognition because it's like an uncomfortable reality that most people don't want to face. But when you drop the conceptions we have, then it opens you up for a whole new way of life. And that's what Schopenhauer was trying to get you to understand.
English, French, Italian, Spanish, Latin, and ancient Greek. In 1813, Schopenhauer took himself off to a quiet country to work on his doctorate thesis, entitled On the Fourfold Root of the Principle of Sufficient Reason, where he stipulates the philosophical principle that nothing is without a reason for why it is. It con-
Schopenhauer was greatly influenced by Spinoza. I think that's the most, I think Spinoza probably has the most influence on Schopenhauer from reading him. And Spinoza was basically, well, he was a heretic at the time, or heretic at the time, but basically Spinoza's grand idea is that everything's connected, everything is an expression of the same force, everything has the same fundamental building blocks. And this is far before the understanding of DNA or the understanding of atoms. And this is what Spinoza is basically proving through logic. It's super, super interesting. It's about 30 pages. If you have time, go read Spinoza's Ethics. But basically, there was this grand idea of some force that connects everything, some matter that is expressed in merely different ways. And Schopenhauer saw this not as a physical thing, but also as a spiritual force, which is very interesting because most philosoph most philosophers take a purely rational basis for things, but Schopenhauer is able to weave in like a symbolic, poetic understanding.
Conditions how we perceive the world of representation, a central theme to his later work. Schopenhauer, however,
Schopenhauer, another big thing he's very adamant about is the idea of forms. Um, if you read anything that's very scientific, this is the best example that's very Aristotelian in nature. So Aristotle believed that things are as they appear they are. So whatever you see something as, that's purely what it is. Whereas Plato, the Platonic idea of forms is that our observations are not perfect. Our observations are not all encapsulating. So therefore, we can never quite know the true nature of things. And Schopenhauer was of the belief that Plato was correct. And the majority of philosophers, I'd probably say like 90% of philosophers, 90% of people in general probably are more on the Aristotelian side of things, that their perception is the end all be all. But once you allow room for gaps in your perception and you understand this fact, then you can find a deeper meaning, find a deeper sense of things.
became increasingly disillusioned by academic philosophers because of their emphasis on abstractions and generalizations instead of experience. Academic philosophers, he felt, acquired their philosophical problems conceptually, while the real philosophers acquire them existentially, by an involuntary reflection on their own existence and experience. The work of Schopenhauer's life was to be distinguished by lived experience. Above all, there is a man speaking, a whole life, a whole way of seeing the world are embodied before us on those pages. Schopenhauer's writing is far from the sterile and academic German of the time.
His writing is, compared to other philosophers, especially philosophers that are like in the upper echelon of respect, most you read a philosopher, you're like, this is so boring. And then the second you're starting to check out, they say something interesting, and then you stick around. Schopenhauer is not that. Schopenhauer, when you read him, it's more like stream of consciousness. It's more like you're having a conversation with him. He's not telling you what to think. He's guiding you to the solution. And that's what's so interesting about him, because it doesn't come off as preachy. It doesn't come off as like trying to win you over. It comes off as like trying to lead you to the same solution he had.
His work is straightforward, colloquial, concrete, full of metaphors and anecdotes. During this time, Schopenhauer was introduced to Hinduism and Buddhism, opening a whole new world of thought. He fell in love with the Latin translation of the Upanishads, and for the most of his life, he read a few pages of it every night before going to sleep. He wrote, "It is the most rewarding and elevating reading, with the exception of the original text, possible in the whole world. It has been the consolation of my life and will be that of my death." In 18
So it's very interesting to see most of my favorite philosophers, most of my favorite thinkers have picked up sort of Eastern idea at some point in their lives. So Plato, Socrates, Pythagoras, Jung, Nietzsche, inspired by Schopenhauer, Emerson, Robert Anton Wilson. I'm assuming James Joyce at some point. His writing is too human for him not to. But it's so weird that most of the greatest ideas that we find in Western philosophy are really Eastern philosophical ideas packaged for the Western mind.
1821, Schopenhauer had an incident with his neighbor. It is said that the woman knew that he was wealthy and feigned falling from the stairs, accusing Schopenhauer for it. She sued him and won the case. Schopenhauer had to pay her a pension for the remaining 20 years of her life. When she died, Schopenhauer wrote victoriously in his journals, "The old woman dies, the burden is lifted." His magnum opus is The World as Will and Representation, published at the end of 1818, when he
It's
was 30
really,
years
really
old.
good.
The second edition was published in 1844, which includes an edited version of the first edition, as well as additional commentary on his ideas. It was revised a year before his death. Much of his later writings is a reflection or enrichment of this work, written in his 20s, and from which he never departed.
So he's going to explain it, but the world as will and representation. The basic idea is there's a force that guides us that we're not always aware of, but it makes us act. And when we act according to this force, then we act against our best interests a lot of times. And what this force is nothing aside from what Schopenhauer calls the will to live. So like think of why most people are obsessed with money. Think of why most people hoard things. Think of why most people are afraid to take risks. This is what Schopenhauer classifies the will to live. And the will to live really just means like survival of yourself versus survival of others. Like you'll always put yourself first. And we can obviously find examples of this where this isn't the beneficial decision. Like is stealing from someone else because you want it? Is that the best thing? Probably not. And it's in this idea that Schopenhauer says most of human pain, most of human problems come from. But when we can expand beyond our own nature, then when we can expand beyond these ideals, then we open ourselves up for greatness. Then we open ourselves up for happiness, for contentment. Um, Schopenhauer basically also explains the idea of meditation. He also explains a very Spinoza idea that all compassion comes from recognizing that you are everything, that everything that makes up you also makes up everything else. Every atom in the room right now, building blocks level, are all the same. It's the same thing with the things that make up human beings. We all have the same DNA. It might differ a little bit, but the core elements are still the same. There's still a there's still a little fraction of us in everything. And then when you start to see people through this light, when you start to see people through this ideal, then you start to exercise more compassion because you see yourself in them.
Departed. The work of his life is unitary in a way that makes it best understood as a single, organic whole. This masterwork contains Schopenhauer's entire philosophy, epistemology, metaphysics, aesthetics, and ethics. The presentation and structure of the book is clear and separated into 4 parts. He asserted that his work was meant to convey a single thought and suggested a careful study of the book in order to clarify the connection of each part to the other. Schopenhauer was convinced that in his
Most of the
masterpiece
best
he had finally
philosophers have
solved
had
the
a back.
fundamental
Yeah.
problems of philosophy. However, his work went
You
very
mean,
nearly
wait,
unsolved.
do you mean in Eastern countries? Or are you in the East saying that most of them have a background in the West? There's an interesting theory. I wish I could cite it. I don't know exactly who said it, but someone said that like starting with the Bronze Age, basically information and the hub of power and the hub of basically innovation has always moved west. So like during the Bronze Age, it was I can't remember what country, but it was somewhere in Asia, and then it moves to a few other places, but Rome, Britain, then America. And even in America, it moved from New York to LA with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's not LA, but you know what I'm saying. It moved to California. And it's just an interesting idea. The more the when you start to notice these things, you're like, well, maybe there's something to it. But
Sold, unreviewed, and unread. This neglect continued until his old age, and was thus the dominating feature of his experience of life. It needs to be considered along with maternal rejection in explaining his profound pessimism. Hegel was a contemporary of Schopenhauer, and was at the height of his celebrity.
so I don't think Schopenhauer's pessimism comes from purely his life experience, purely his lack of success. I think an element of his pessimism also comes from the way he viewed things. Like if you strip all of the Buddhist ideas away from Buddha, he's the most pessimistic person ever. Like if you just take the first part of like absurdism that nothing matters, it's very depressing. But when you add the conclusion, nothing matters, so I should live my life and experience as much happiness as I can, then it's an inspiring philosophy. The cultural difference, you find most of the great things in other cultures. Yeah, yeah. I think it's really weird too, the idea that like I'm not even gonna get into it.
drawing large
Trouble.
crowds in the University of Berlin. For
It's not
Hegel,
even
the
worth
world
it
is
for me to
active
say.
and develops through the world's geist or spirit as time progresses. At every moment in the history of the world's spirit, there are internal contradictions to the zeitgeist, which must be overcome through a dialogue between opposing ideas, moving towards a final perfection, which is the full realization of the spirit in history. Schopenhauer, however, believed that Hegel was a charlatan. The heavy terminology and obscurity was a smokescreen for some rather empty thought. He disagreed that we could achieve knowledge of the absolute by reason and
Heck,
that
it's
we're
killing
heading
me.
towards perfection as time passes. Schopenhauer attempted to teach at the University of
This is one of the funniest stories.
Berlin to propagate his ideas at the same time Hegel was giving his lectures. The result was disastrous. Almost nobody came. In frustration, he left his position as a university teacher soon after. In 1851, Schopenhauer published Peroga and Paralipomena in
So Schopenhauer was holding lectures at the same time as Hegel, and literally Hegel's lectures were completely full, and meanwhile, not the Schopenhauer's lectures.
2 volumes, Greek for appendices and omissions, supplementary essays to his main work, which he considered the birth of his last child, completing his mission in the world. He felt as if a load that he had borne since his 24th year, that weighed heavily upon him, had been lifted from his shoulders. Schopenhauer's art book titles certainly must have played a role in his lack of popular reception. Nevertheless, it was his first successful, widely read book, partly due to the work of his disciples who wrote praising reviews. Though he started to gain popularity, he preferred to live in solitude. He would wake up early, read
He has like the weirdest face. Should I get the Schopenhauer look? Should I be Schopenhauer for Halloween?
until noon, play his flute, have lunch at the same place as always, and take
I
long
just
walks
my
with his
hair is out to
poodles.
here.
He called them all Atman, reflecting the Sanskrit word for true self. He adored them above any person. He would finish the day by reading a few lines of the Upanishads before bed. Schopenhauer's life can be described as a dark, sad, long, and lonely life.
I think there's a certain element to your culture that makes your country go round. There also needs to be a little bit of openness. Like take the good of everything. There's definitely downfalls to Western society, but there's definitely some good things. The idea of free speech is probably the best, but the crime rates aren't good. The stagnation in industry, the over-reliance on degrees that become less and less valuable every single year. Like there's a million things that we can point to in Western society that's bad, but like it's the same thing with the East. There's really good ideas in the East, but there's also some like really bad things. I mean, like I'm not even gonna talk. I'm gonna get myself in trouble. But like there, this is not everyone, but there's like the caste system in India. Like it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing believing that someone's lesser for the color of their skin. Like it's not. You know what I mean? It's like there's good and bad in every single society, and it's our ability to take the good, not take the bad.
In 1860, at the age of 72, Schopenhauer had his breakfast and was apparently well. Shortly after, he was found dead while still seated at the table. The world is my idea. This is a truth which holds good for everything that lives and knows, though man alone can bring it into reflective and abstract.
The world is my idea. This is a very profound statement here. So what he's saying is very interesting. What he's saying is Whatever you think the world is, it will become. Think of someone that sees the world in a Christian lens. They're going to see the world as a Christian one. They're going to see that every act of evil is an act of Satan. Every act of good is an act of Jesus's grace. Um, there's also the communist, though. They'll say that any injustice that's done is because of the greedy capitalists, and if the workers had the means of production, then everything would be solved and everyone would be friends. And human nature would completely go out the window because people wouldn't take advantage of their positions of power. And it's like we can go on and on about this example, about this idea, but I think this is something that really gets summed up best in Robert Anton Wilson's one of his most famous quotes. It's what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. What lens you see the world through, your mind will begin to notice more of. Have you ever bought a car and now that you bought that car, you see that car more and more and more and more? There was the same amount of cars that looked exactly like yours. There was the same amount of cars that were on the road. But because you bought it, now you're more aware of it and now you're seeing more of it. This is a really, really important idea. And I need people to understand this because like the way you view the world is actively going to affect how it appears to you. It's a very weird philosophical concept, but once you understand it and once you could start pinpointing it, you could start changing the way you see the world. Now every time something goes bad, it's not as bad because you could see, you know what? It's just preparing me to be better. It's just preparing me for when I win because when I win, I'm going to be happier from all the times I failed. As Khalil Gibran said, every sorrow deepens your joy. It's this idea.
Consciousness. This is how Schopenhauer started his book. He wanted to understand the world in which he found himself, and his role as an agent in the world. He tried to form a coherent and unified interpretation of human experience, and sought to identify the underlying force of reality. He called it the will, also called will to live or will to life, which is the essence of existence. Schopenhauer
Yeah, so Schopenhauer's will is just like think of your impulses, think of your instincts, think of the things that like are just you can't really control. They're all extensions of the will or the will to live. Um, the idea of self-preservation, the idea of blaming others, these are all things that are inherently bad. We all know they're bad, but we do them anyway because it's an unconscious defense mechanism because we want to stay alive, because we want to survive. Never thought of it like that. Yeah, I mean, when you start like when you really start changing your life, when you really start changing who you are, one thing that's going to change is the way you view the world, is the way things appear. And you won't even notice it in the moment, but you'll think back to a few years ago and think back to how you would deal with the problems that you're dealing with right now. And it's such a stark difference in the way that I would approach things today that I would approach things 2 years ago. Like how I handle stress now is so different. How I handle setbacks now is completely different. Like now, when something goes bad in my life, now when something goes wrong, I calm myself down. I meditate. I remove myself from the situation. I don't allow myself to get emotionally attached or emotionally involved because nothing good has ever came from being emotional in a situation that makes you upset. There's never been a good thought, there's never been a good decision. And for me, if I can calm myself down, take 10, 15 minutes, put things in perspective, then the problem's still there. The problem's still a problem. But now I'm thinking without stress. Now I'm thinking without anxiety, thinking without fear. And I can make the best decision. I promise you one thing. If you can make the best decision in every single thing that happens to you, you're fine. You're golden. And how do we make the best decision? We make the best decision by meditating, by calming our mind down, by listening to the actual facts of the situation and getting beyond our egos, getting beyond our emotions, and understanding that it's not as serious as we think. Whatever problem you're going through right now, unless it's a serious life altering problem, you will not even remember in 10 years. You will not even remember in 20 years. So why are you making such a big deal about it now? Why are you building it up to be such a vast and awful problem? The majority of things that we go through, I would say 90, 95%, fix themselves. And if they don't fix themselves, it can be fixed with a decent amount of effort. The things that we see as problems really aren't problems.
Schopenhauer was influenced by Kant, and like him, he believed that the world around us, with all its objects, are only representations. Any reality that we perceive has been put there by our own minds which form ideas. This was Kant's idea of idealism.
So this is very important because we live in a world of black and white. We live in a world of this or that. The only truth is found in one of two solutions. And it's very weird because these clingings to these isms is what makes everyone unhappy. There's no ideology that encompasses the whole because ideologies are inventions of the brain. And the brain can only perceive so many things. The brain can only perceive to such a degree. Even supercomputers estimate. The estimations for how much gas your car uses, it's not perfect. The estimation for how much force is going to go through a bridge is not perfect. They're all models. They're all somewhat imperfect. And once you understand the world's based off of imperfect measurements, then I think you should also understand that the world is based off imperfect ideas. What's up, Tejas? Or Tejas, I'm sorry. I
As
don't
he
know which
called
one it
it.
is.
The only thing we think about is what is in our minds. The sense perception we have of the world is not the world. We have no access to the world because we are always in our own head. I think, therefore I am. Descartes' mind.
We have no access to the world because we're always in our minds. I was using this example yesterday, but think of trying to describe a rose. Whenever you try to describe a rose, it never quite gets to the point. It never quite can encapsulate exactly what makes a rose so pleasing to look at. You could describe the color, you could describe the shape, you could describe the thorns, you could describe the smell, and maybe you could get to something close. But it's never quite the same. And that's what he's talking about here.
And body split. However, for Schopenhauer, there must be something else than just pure thinking, something more than just a brain in a jar. In fact, there's only one aspect of the world that is not given to us merely as representation, one object that we embody in space and time, and with which we have a direct relationship with, our body. Schopenhauer calls this the principle of individuation, our mode of cognition of the phenomenal world. It designates the uniqueness of each individual, but this is a barrier to us, because the individual is an illusion. It is the outward manifestation of our true and inmost being, the will, which connects us with the entire world. Schopenhauer uses Plato's.
So these are these are ideas that sound complex, but they're very simple. You think of it, for me, it's Taoism because understand Taoism the best. But think of what Schopenhauer is saying as the will is just human nature. The will is the human nature to lie, steal, and cheat for the sake of their own um, self-preservation. And the true self is the one that's aligned with the Tao, the one that lives in a manner that is thoughtless, the one that lives in a state of non-action. Because what they're doing is so fluid that they lose themselves in it.
Allegory of the cave to remind us that unless we acknowledge this, we are like men who sit in a dark cave, bound so fast that they cannot turn their heads, and who see nothing but the shadows of real things which pass between them and a fire burning behind them, the light of which casts shadows on the wall opposite them. And even of themselves and of each other they see only the shadows on the wall. Their wisdom would thus consist in predicting the order of the shadows learned from experience. The real archetypes, on the other hand, to which these shadows correspond, the eternal ideas, the original forms of all things, can alone be said to have true being, because they always are, but never become nor pass away.
Lao Tzu says, the Tao that is spoken, the Tao that we are speaking about, is not the true Tao because it exists beyond any understanding. It's the same thing as the conception of God. If something's so great that it created everything, how could we ever explain what it is? How could we ever understand the mechanisms? How could we ever perceive what's happening? It's beyond what we are capable of getting through our senses.
For Schopenhauer, those for whom people and all things have not at times appeared as mere phantoms or illusions have no capacity for philosophy. There's only the self-same unchangeable being that is before us, which today pursues the same ends as it did yesterday and ever will. The true symbol of nature is the circle. From this insight, Schopenhauer concludes that the underlying force of every representation, and also of the world as a whole, is the will. This, however, may lead to some confusion, as will connotes a sort of personality with a certain aim. It is not just our individual will, it also includes animals, trees, stones, and the entire cosmos. Schopenhauer's will can be seen as a force or energy, it is the thing in itself. While Kant believed that the thing in itself was a world beyond human reach, Schopenhauer believed that it is at the core of existence. The will is not rational, conscious, nor intentional, but rather an
Schopenhauer's will is kind of pessimistic, though. From what I'm understanding, Kant must be something that's like the Tao or the Tao, the natural way of things. For Schopenhauer, there's bad elements of the will. The will can make you do things wrong, whereas the Taoists believe that if you live in accordance with the way, the Tao, the will, everything is perfect, everything is complete bliss.
irrational, unconscious, and blind desire that restlessly strives for more activity. This is Schopenhauer's great insight that breaks away from all of his predecessors. The will is the tornado that swirls inside of us and throws us from one place to the other. It is the source of our insatiable appetite that results in strife and misery. From desire I rush to satisfaction, from satisfaction I leap to desire. Existence is typified by unrest. The will is a war of all against all.
Schopenhauer was also really inspired by Faust. It's weird to see how Faust is almost like the to German or Western philosophers.
All, a proto-Darwinian thought. Long before Freud's psychoanalysis, Schopenhauer argued that most of our
Schopenhauer was a big influence for Freud, by the way.
inner life is unknown to us. Our actions, decisions, and speech are for the
If you
most
think
part
about it, like
unconsciously
Freud's psychosexual theory is pretty much just Schopenhauer's will to live.
motivated by our drives, so that we do not even know our full inner selves. In summary, for Schopenhauer the world has two aspects related to each other as two sides of the same coin. A world of representation, which is constituted by our minds, and a will, as the irrational blind force which is at the core of existence and is undifferentiated and beyond space, time, and causality. The world is will and representation. It is impossible to discover the secret of reality by examining matter first, and then proceeding to examine thought. We must begin with that which we know directly and intimately, ourselves. Thus we see already that we can never arrive at the real nature of things from without. However much we investigate, we can never reach anything but images and names. We are like a man who goes round a castle, seeking in vain.
So, the best way to explain this idea is perhaps through poetry, perhaps through art, or I felt my favorite way to explain this is when you listen to Frank Sinatra sing, is that a song or a piece of Sinatra's soul coming through the speakers? And there's an element to a great singer, there's an element to a great artist that's beyond comprehension. It's beyond any sort of explanation. And that's what he's talking about here. There's certain things that exist outside our senses, our perceptors, the way that we see things, the way that we view things, the way that we internalize things. And they can only be experienced through feelings, but can never be captured in any other way.
For an entrance, and sometimes sketching the facades, and yet this is the method that has been followed by all philosophers before me. If we look at the outside world, the common life is to study, graduate, get a job, marry, have kids, work, and live happily ever after. Except that one doesn't live happily ever after. At best, a desire is satisfied for a short time, but immediately after another desire will emerge. There's no end point
Exhausted.
of satisfaction.
Oh, I'm gonna stream. I promise I'm gonna stream longer tomorrow. I'm just like dying. Not actually, just a long day. Um, wow, we made it 13 minutes into a video. I'm shocked. But there's no way I'm gonna finish this tonight. I might pick up where I left off tomorrow. Um, love you guys. Thank you guys so much. I'll catch you in the next one.